Hello and happy May, of course. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Monica Buckle, who is usually our regular moderator, is unable to join us today because she had a work conflict. So I'm going to be filling in for her, but I'm also going to be working the technology of Zoom. So if we have a glitch or two, it's probably my fault. I just ask that you please be patient with me. As many of you know, I am Shannon Clifford, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mesa Verde Foundation, which is a nonprofit philanthropic partner to Mesa Verde National Park. The foundation fulfills its role as a philanthropic partner by raising funds to support the park's needs, everything from trail restoration to film creation. Did I just say film creation? I did, which leads right into the incredible news that I must share with you today. We are so excited to announce that after nearly 3 years of work by the park's interpretive team and through a collaboration between Mesa Verde National Park, the Mesa Verde Foundation, and the Colorado State Historical Fund, the park has a new film. Yay! The new film will replace the park's outdated visitor film and will be shown in the Chapin Mesa Archaeological Museum inside the park. The film focuses on contemporary pueblos and tribes' connections to Mesa Verde as told by the members of those communities. To celebrate, the foundation is hosting a film premiere event at Fort Lewis College on Friday, June 2nd. This is your chance to join us on the red carpet and be among the first to see the film. For more information, please visit our website at the link that I will post in the chat box. Now, let's get to the serious business of today's webinar. When you gotta go, the evolution of the National Park Service Comfort Station. Of course, when you have a serious topic, you need a serious presenter. Elizabeth, or Lizzie, Dickey has had the privilege of working at Mesa Verde National Park since 2015. She is currently the Chief of Cultural Resources, where she gets to fulfill her personal mission of saving the historic urinals of Mesa Verde. Lizzie has a master's degree from the University of Oregon in historic preservation. Before joining the Mesa Verde team, she previously worked for the Midwest Regional Office of the National Park Service and the Nevada Department of Transportation. She lives right outside of Mesa Verde and enjoys beautiful views of the mesa. In her free time, Lizzie plays the ukulele and the viola. She loves gardening and exploring historic places. She loves gardening and exploring historic prisons. She says that she makes her family crazy because she has to check out the bathrooms everywhere they go. Lizzie wants people to be able to ask questions during her presentation. So if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat box and I will ask it when we have a break in the action, if there is one. Now, join me in welcoming Lizzie Dickey. Lizzie, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Shannon. Let me just pull up my screen here. So Shannon called me before the talk to kind of get some information about my background. And I told her all this stuff about bathrooms. And then later I was thinking, oh my God, these people are going to think I'm such a weirdo. All I talk about is bathrooms. So in this moment of panic, I sent her this email. I was like, I like more than bathrooms. I like prisons too. And I pressed send. And then I thought, maybe that wasn't really the normal appearance I was trying to create. But anyway, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for joining me. And what we're going to talk about are comfort stations, which is the Park Service's lovely euphemism for a public toilet. Okay, so Shannon, oh, there we go. Okay, the screen is moving. So a lot of, we usually think of the modern toilet, the modern bathroom as something invented by Thomas Crapper, who lived from 1836 to 1910. He wasn't actually the father of the modern toilet. What he really did was he created a U-bend in the plumbing that trapped the gases. Before it had sort of this S-bend, everything could kind of come back out. But he improved the plumbing design, and that's what made him so famous. He really would be better to think of him as a popularizer of indoor plumbing rather than the inventor of the modern toilet. Because flushing toilets have been around a really long time, like literally over 1,000 years of flushing toilets. This one is an example from South Korea. It didn't have, you had to flush it using your own water from a bucket. So you would pour the water into the drain and then it would flow away. So it didn't quite have all the mechanical tricks that we have today, but essentially in its basic form, it was quite similar to a modern flushing toilet. Communal toilets, seen here, were very popular. Roman times, it was considered part of the government's duty to provide public toilets for the community. It helped keep down diseases. What I found interesting about these is, so you think about Roman bathhouses and how people lounged around in the bathhouse, and like, was it the same with the public toilets? It wasn't. They were actually pretty foul, disgusting places to be in, as you might imagine. The rats and animals could live in the open sewage drain underneath there. And there were pockets of methane gas that could explode and burn your backside if you weren't careful. No toilet paper, then they used this stick with a sponge on the end. And that is, if you notice the little keyhole entry on the front of the toilets, that's where you would put in the stick with the sponge and clean up afterward. One of the interesting things I found about this was archaeologists were looking at public community toilets, and they were looking for graffiti, because there's always interesting graffiti on bathrooms. And they found surprisingly little graffiti inside of the bathroom, a whole bunch on the outside, but nothing inside. And what that told them, or how they interpreted it, was people were not spending any longer in the bathroom than they absolutely had to. They were just doing their business and getting out of there. So toilet technology really hasn't changed very much. What's changed is its availability. Like the South Korean toilet, that was for the royal family. They had access to it, but the public, the masses, did not. What changes in public toilets is who has access to that technology. Not that it was a great new invention. It was just no one had access to it. So in this example from New York toilets for a tenement, like over 100 people might be using these toilets from one building. You do see one major innovation in toilet technology, and that is the lid. There's a toilet lid right there. So waste doesn't actually spread diseases. It's flies and insects and things that carry it around. So the lid was a huge innovation to keep diseases from spreading by keeping the flies in check. Although I noticed there's only one lid on these toilets, and so it probably wasn't really doing its job, especially since it's up. So I wanted to look at more locally how outhouses changed to indoor plumbing. So I went to look at the Sanborn insurance maps for the town of Mancos, which is just outside of Mesa Verde. Are there any folks from Mancos out there? Let us know in the chat. So if you're not familiar with the Sanborn insurance map, they are a fabulous resource for historic buildings in looking at how towns grew and developed. It was a private company, created them for insurance purposes, and they have information like yellow means that the dwelling was made out of wood. If there's a D in it, it's a dwelling. If there's an X through the roof, here, I'll show you an example. That means it's a livery or a place for animals, usually horses. But what I was looking for was outhouses, and you can see them very clearly at the back of the lot, as far away from the house as you can get. This is a corner of Grand and Mesa, if anyone is familiar with Mancos. And so I had to discount all the little buildings that were clearly for animals, but there's these two are contenders, probably outhouses. And I wanted to see how it changed over the years. So I looked at the 1910, 1919 map, and I was kind of thinking, well, toilets, indoor plumbing would become more popular, more available. Mancos would get a sewage system. They got electricity, I believe, in around 1906. I'm not sure when the sewage came in, but it would probably be sort of around that time. But I was kind of surprised to see they still kept the outhouses. So even if people were adding indoor plumbing, they were still keeping that backup plan of having the outhouse available. One major change that indoor plumbing did to outhouses was toilet paper. If you have an outhouse, you can throw anything down that hole, you know, corn cobs, newspapers, pieces of cloth, whatever. But you can't do that with indoor plumbing. You will find out really quickly it's not going to work out very well. So the invention of toilet paper coincided with popularity of indoor plumbing for most Americans. It was patented in 1891. It was on the market, produced for the mass market in the mid 1850s. But then it was more like a Kleenex box with each individual paper in it. But Seth Wheeler patented the invention of toilet paper on a roll, and it's essentially been unchanged since then. So typical with toilet technology, there's not a huge amount of change in technology. It's just in who has access to use it. Oh, I was going to mention Sears and Roebuck catalog, very popular for toilet paper. And also the Old Farmer's Almanac, which has, if you notice, I think to this day, it has a hole in the corner so that you can, what they say is so you can nail it to the wall in your kitchen. But it wasn't being nailed to the wall in the kitchen. It was being nailed to the wall in the outhouse. And the sheet sizes were convenient for that thing. So Mancos is the gateway to Mesa Verde, as I'm sure you know, and just the quickest of introductions to Mesa Verde National Park. I'm sure you guys are all old hats at this, but we're a park established in 1906. The land that the park is made out of came from Mountain Ute tribal lands. We're the very first national park to protect cultural resources. Previous parks were established to protect natural resources. And we're best known for our amazing ancestral pueblo people who thrived here from around 300 CE to 1300 CE. And when people come to national parks, they got to use the bathroom. I took a brief interpretation training, and what they told all of the participants was, if people don't have their basic needs met, they're never going to hear your message. So the most important piece of information that the ranger could give to people was where the bathroom is, so they can take care of their immediate needs and then get back to the business of learning about the national park. This example here was one of Mesa Verde's very first public restrooms. It's, you know, 4-holer, one side for men, one side for women. And it was located right by the entrance of the park. If you've been by recently, we're starting construction on a roundabout at the entrance. And this latrine still lives on today as an archaeological site. And so that site has been identified as an avoidance area so that the construction work doesn't impact the archaeological site that's inside of the pit toilet from them. We do still have one example, a really early outhouse located in the park. It's not in great shape. It has seen better days. It's the Rock Springs Ranger Station. It's out on Wetherell Mesa. The public can't, you might be able to see it from the road, but you can't get to it. And I'm hoping someday to do a preservation project on this bathroom so that we can keep this piece of history still alive. Mesa Verde took a big turn as far as planning and development when Superintendent Jesse Nussbaum came to the park. Jesse Nussbaum, when you hear about history of Mesa Verde, you would think that he's like the only superintendent who ever worked in the park, because that's all you hear about, Jesse Nussbaum. But he was there in a long time, and he did a lot of changes, and he set things up, like the architectural style, that have carried through to this day. So he really did have quite a large influence. And his wife, Eileen Nussbaum, was hugely energetic and intelligent and helped a lot in developing the park and creating architectural plans and buildings in the park. When she got here, she was really dismayed at the public facilities. And what she said was, women are not going to come to a national park if they have to go and use the bush to do their business in. That's not going to fly with women. So she set out on her own campaign to build a decent comfort station. The word comfort station came about in about the 1920s. There's not too much comfortable about them, but it would be more comfortable than a bush. So I guess that was the improvement there. So when Eileen came here, her very first #1 priority was to build her own house, naturally. Her own house did not have a bathroom in it. She had an outhouse like everybody else. And then next, her and Jesse designed and constructed the headquarters building. And I've included this picture of the most amazing mop sink in the headquarters building. It leaks, it doesn't work very well. People keep trying to get rid of it, but it is original to the building. So I hope we can fix it and keep it going. And our #2 building that she constructed was the comfort station. This was probably, the most elaborate bathroom to be seen there at this time. I mean, you go from the farm style outhouse to a stone constructed building constructed in the modified Pueblo Revival style. It was built in 1923, so it's one of the very earliest structures, Park Service structures that were constructed there. And unfortunately, this bush grew right in front of it, so it's not a great photograph, but this is the earliest photograph I've ever found of the comfort station. So if there are any historians out there, and if you might run across an earlier photograph of this building, I'd love to see it if you could send it to me. So does anyone know what this comfort station became? You can still go visit it today, but you can't use the bathroom in it anymore. Please don't, because now it is a post office, possibly the cutest post office in the United States. It was converted into a post office by the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1936. And while I don't have original plans of what the comfort station looked like, I have the next best thing. I have the plans of when they did the conversion. And it has little notes in there like, remove the chemical tanks and fill pits. So we know it was a chemical toilet. There was no plumbing going anywhere. So that would mean it would have to be pumped out periodically. And where did it go? It went over the canyon. They just pumped it out over the canyon. This is the back of the building, and one of our seasonal rangers, a fire spotter named Ann Lundberg, theorized that the back door was for women and that the men's entrance was on the one side and the women's was on the back for modesty and to be discreet about what you were doing in this building. So I don't know, but I think that's a pretty good theory that might be the case. After that comfort station was converted into the post office, the park still had to have a public comfort station up in the headquarters area. So if you're familiar with the park, you probably know the very best secret spot to go see Spruce Tree House, which is the back porch of the Chief Ranger's office. And underneath the back porch is where the second public comfort station was. This is it, and that's also my backdrop, the men's side of the comfort station underneath in the basement of the Chief Ranger's office. So that comfort station existed almost unchanged into the 1980s, and then it was converted into IT offices, storage, used for a couple other things, but it's no longer a bathroom anymore. You'll see the urinals. I do kind of enjoy urinals, and probably because I don't have to use them. That's probably why I think they're cool. But the one in the middle there is probably from the 1930s. So they were reusing older style urinals when they did the conversion for the new bathroom. So the golden age of public comfort stations had to be with the CCC, the 1930s to the 1940s. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Civilian Conservation Corps and all the work that they did throughout the Park Service, but they were huge in construction of buildings at Mesa Verde. So I looked up records, and we have about records of about 85 buildings that the CCC either made an addition to, constructed from scratch, or did some kind of major alterations to. So they changed the whole appearance of the park and the aesthetic, and had, just huge influence on the infrastructure of it. So out of those 85 buildings, and there were probably more, that was just the records that I could find, they only constructed 3 public comfort stations. I'm sure they did more latrines and outhouses, but for actual stone-built comfort stations, we only have 3. And fortunately for us, all 3 are still standing. And you can go visit and use one of them. The one you can use is in the Spruce Tree Campground area, which is now called the picnic area. And it's open to the public, and it has been rehabilitated just within the past 5 years, I think. They took out some of the metal stalls that were added in later, and they put back in wood stalls that were designed based on the original drawings for the bathroom. When I had proposed that they use wood, the maintenance people are like, no, there's no way, don't use wood. Everyone's going to carve their name into it. It's going to be a mess. But somehow I won that argument. They did put in the wood stall dividers. And as I check in periodically, I have never seen any graffiti in there, and I've never seen anyone carve their name in there. So fingers crossed, let's hope that people respect it. That bathroom, those poor CCC boys, they were out there constructing it in February. This looks like our February this year. They were trying to mix concrete and do masonry work in the dead of winter. The other comforts, so I should say there's 2, they're almost identical, CCC built comfort stations in the picnic area. And this is the 3rd one built by the CCC. This is the Hogan comfort station, built 1937, and it's vaguely in the shape of a Hogan. This is the interior of it before they did some upgrades to it. When they upgraded it, they had to take out the sink and this toilet because they didn't code for ADA accessibility. They weren't working particularly well. We like to use low flush water saving toilets now. So they took them out. But when they do that, we don't just throw them away. I like to save all of the urinals and toilets in the park. So we do have a Connex box where we save original fabric that has to be removed from buildings. And, someday perhaps it could be reused or is just retained as a piece of our history. If you don't know it, here's a trick for dating buildings. Look underneath the sink. There's almost always a date of manufacture underneath there. So you can see this one was built in 1937, which matches up nicely when the building was actually constructed. A lot of times the dates don't match, they reused an older toilet or they replaced it later. So it's certainly not definitive, but it does help you kind of determine the construction history of buildings that you're looking at.
Lizzie, before you...
Oh, yes.
I'm so sorry. Before you move on, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we do have a question from Stephanie Garcia. Is this okay?
Yeah, of course.
She said it looks like all 3 of the urinals, I think that's the picture you have behind you too, are different. Do you know if that was intentional?
Yes. Well, thank you, Stephanie, for your interest in urinals. I don't think it was intentional. Here's what I think happened. I think that middle one is the earliest, dating to the 1930s. And then I think the 2 on the outer edge are later, probably dating to the 1950s or 60s. And I think that the park was cheap and they just used what they had and probably weren't overly concerned about having matching urinals. Because what kind of weirdo thinks about urinals, honestly? So I think it was just kind of mismatched because we were sort of being cheap and using whatever was there. Yeah, thank you. Good question. So the Hogan, yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I think she's good.
Okay.
Thank you for answering the question, and then I'm sorry for interrupting.
Not at all. Anytime. This is the floor plan for the Hogan bathroom. Today it has a washer and dryer on the left-hand side. You'll see the men's side on the top, women's on the bottom. And you'll notice men's side, there's 2 sinks, 2 toilets. On the women's side, there's 1 sink, 1 toilet. What is with that? We know it's supposed to be the other way around. Women take forever. But the reason was this was housing for Navajo construction crews. And they were, the park had hired Navajo laborers, and they constructed buildings, roads. They did a lot of road construction in the park over the years. And so they had housing in the Hogan area, which is in the headquarters area of the park. Let's see, I'm trying to change the slide, but it's not moving. Is it changing for you guys? No.
I'm having a bit of a freeze too, Lizzie. It might be just smart to try again, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
It
Okay.
could very well be just a glitch in the Wi-Fi. I apologize for that, but we will hope for a quick recovery. Yay!
Yay! Good. You guys didn't have to hold it for too long. So a photograph here showing the hogans that were constructed for the Navajo laborers to work in. Most of them were single men, but a few did have families. So there probably just weren't very many women in the area. But you see some kiddos here hanging out by the hogan. So that kind of brings up the question, if there was a separate bathroom for Navajo laborers, did the park have segregated bathrooms? I would say in that case, no, that it was really just a bathroom for workers in the park, and that happened to be the area they lived in. So I wouldn't consider that a segregated bathroom, but other parks did have segregated bathrooms all the way through the 1950s. So parks typically are their own jurisdiction. So they are not required to follow state or county law. They follow federal law. Now, sometimes there's overlaps in different cases, but for the most part, that's the case. So the park did have the choice of creating segregated bathrooms or not in the South, where that was part of county and local laws. Harold Ickes was the secretary of the park at the time, and from his personal correspondence, we can see historically that he was very opposed to segregation in national parks, but he felt that it would cause violence if they were to try and integrate in parks. So he made the rule that national parks would follow local laws when it came to segregation. So there's this example from Shenandoah. They had a whole separate area, a segregated area campground. So I was really curious to see where Mesa Verde stood on that, and the place to look would be the Green Book. Probably many of you are familiar with this book. It was a book for African-American travelers, because if you don't know where you're going to be able to buy food at, get a hotel at, get gas at, it makes it really hard to travel. And there's lots of stories about families who, when they went on vacation, they just slept in the car because there was not a hotel available for them. So I looked up Mesa Verde, and I was really happy to see that Mesa Verde Spruce Tree Lodge was listed in the Green Book. This was from 1957, but I checked a couple years, it was throughout the years. So Mesa Verde did not segregate and welcomed all different visitors. So back to sort of the earlier thought, the golden age, we took a detour there, but the golden age of public restrooms was the 1930s and 40s. It wasn't the golden age for social equality and social justice, but and then after the golden age, it all went down the tubes. The CCC disbanded because World War II had started. United States entered into World War II, and immediately CCC folks were enrolled and went off to war. Visitation to national parks down the drain. Visitation at Mesa Verde went down. I'll show you this graph. So during the war years and shortly after the war years, there was almost no big projects going on in national parks, certainly not at Mesa Verde. We didn't have major construction going on. We didn't have infrastructure projects. It just kind of stood still. But there was that post-World War II rebound, and it came back with a vengeance. There were more people than the parks could handle after World War II was over. And that led to Mission 66, which was a way that the park used it. It was a program to try and rebuild the infrastructure in their park for their, so that they could accommodate all the new visitors that were coming in. There were so many people coming into the park. We didn't have campgrounds for them. This is Baseball Diamond Campground, which is up on Chapin Mesa. It's just an open field. Today, it, suitingly enough, is the sewage lagoon in that area. And here's just one of their outdoor toilets that they had, just a drop pot kind of toilet. They also had this, which is pretty swank, I think, 1957 mobile comfort stations brought in to help relieve some of the stress on the park's infrastructure. But it's not a permanent solution. For that, the Mission 6 program developed public restroom designs for public restrooms, and they were essentially the same design everywhere. They just slapped a different siding on it. So it's like everyone gets the same restroom. And if you're a Civil War battlefield, well, we'll make it out of brick. Or if you're a rustic natural park, then we'll put some board and batten on the outside. But it's essentially always the same restroom design. So what did Mesa Verde get? That's what we got. That was after all the architectural designs that were so thoughtful and careful about incorporating the buildings into the landscape, using Pueblo Revival architecture to reflect the culture of the area, to fit in well. This is what Mission 66 gave us. And it's just a complete turnaround from the tradition, the architectural tradition that we had before. They gave us kind of a buff colored concrete, which was supposed to match the sandstone. And they made the roof a little bit flatter, which was supposed to be more in keeping with the Pueblo Revival design. But you can go to almost any park in the United States and you can pick out their Mission 66 bathroom because they're all the same. This one was actually a little bit fancier, the Mesa Top Loop Comfort Station, and it has some lovely turquoise tile on it. And what I love, it's got a floor urinal. See, I only love these because I don't use them. I'm sure they're really not that great. But the floor urinal was kind of intriguing to me. I have not seen too many of those. After Mission 66, the next biggest innovation, I would say, in toilet design had to be the Architectural Barriers Act and the American with Disabilities Act. That changed how restrooms were designed because people had to think about how to be inclusive for people who were in wheelchairs, who had other kind of disabilities so that they could access and use a bathroom. Because bathrooms are considered a basic human right, that people should have a right to be able to have access, safe access to a bathroom. So the federal government was on board pretty quickly in 1968. That's when all federal buildings, new construction, had to accommodate people with disabilities. And then the public, the rest of the country didn't come along until the 1990s. There was a lot of arguments about it because it would mean that small businesses would have to spend more money to renovate, things would be more expensive. But today we all recognize the importance of being inclusive and providing a restroom for everyone. And so that has sort of become the norm now. This is, I wanted to show you two kind of contemporary bathrooms in Mesa Verde. This one from 1985. And right next door to it, in 2017, we built a new restroom. Go back and forth between these. They're really kind of similar looking. And you see the backlash after Mission 66. Not many people were really thrilled with those cookie cutter restrooms in buildings, and they wanted to go back to having Pueblo revival style that was more in keeping with the landscape and the atmosphere of our national park. And you might be wondering, like, there's 2 bathroom buildings right next to each other. What's the story going on there? Well, the funding for the new bathroom was only for new construction. It could not be used for an addition to the old one. And then the second problem was the pipes for the old bathroom went right where the new construction would have been, or where an addition would have been, so they couldn't add an addition because it would have meant rerouting all of the plumbing pipes. So that's why we have 2 bathrooms right next door to each other. And this is sort of our contemporary version of the farm style outhouse, the new latrine. These are also pretty cookie cutter. They're pretty standard designs, plop down anywhere. They come pre-constructed, the cinder block ones, and that's what you'll see today. But you'll notice, like the accessible one down there in the bottom, you know, back when they were doing the farm style outhouses, you never would have thought of making them accessible, but now it's standard that we consider that. So I wanted to wrap up with, what are our comfort stations going to look like in the future? And if you really want to know where bathroom design is going, you got to look to Japan. They have a unique fascination with bathrooms and technology, and the combination is pretty interesting. So this design is in a public park, and you can see the glass is see-through. And when you go into the bathroom, when you lock the door, there's a technology that makes the glass become opaque. So you can see it now, but not once you lock the door. This one is in Beijing. It's truly taking comfort station to the next level, so that you never have to be away from an electronic device or a screen or news feed. This is an example of in toilet pods in a restaurant in London. They look pretty cozy, actually, I think. So each one contains its own toilet inside the pod. And then there's a community area, that's the sink up there in the front. And then the smart toilet. With new technology, there are ways for your toilets to do real-time analysis of your urine. And it can tell you all sorts of things, from like, how much alcohol have you had? How much did you sleep? What are your white blood cell levels at? So this is, right now, this is a prototype toilet, and they include this somewhat unhelpful diagram in their literature. I didn't quite understand what they were trying to convey with that, so I'm probably not smarter than that toilet. But the question becomes, if this kind of technology is prevalent and becomes inexpensive and becomes something that people expect in their own homes to monitor their health, would it also be in a public restroom? Could a company perhaps do something like this? A company that might have mandatory drug checks. You wouldn't have to do that. You could just have people use the bathroom and find out. So all kinds of interesting questions when you combine technology with one of the most basic and historical technologies that we have, which is the public restroom. So thank you so much for listening to that talk, and I hope that you have survived it all in one piece. If you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain anything now, or if you think of something later, or if you have some really cool toilet trivia that you want to share with someone else and you look around you and realize no one else really wants to talk about toilets with you, you can send it to me. I will listen.
Thank you, Lizzie. I'm sure that we're going to have questions. Oh my goodness, they're already popping up. Give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Albert says, I think that outhouses without plumbing would be much cheaper to operate and clean, as long as they're clean and don't smell. Why do plumbing? Question mark.
That's a great question. I think that some of it has to do with public expectation. that you think that there's going to be a flush toilet and you equate a flushing toilet with hygiene and modern standards. So I have been in some really nice, just drop toilets. They smell great. There's breezes coming through. They're not all like that, but I've been in some really nice ones. And it's like, this is nicer than a flushing toilet where you have to maintain the water lines coming into it, the sewage lines going out of it. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I tend to agree with you there. I think it's probably mostly based on public perception and expectations of convenience.
Well, Casey says that she says, Lizzie, we've flipped our lids over this webinar. We knew she was funny, but this is a good one. Ed wants to know, he said, did the chemical toilet waste flowing over the canyon create any environmental issues? Is there any interest in composting toilets? So kind of two different questions.
Yeah.
First, the canyon.
Yes. So I cannot imagine that it did not create environmental issues for wildlife, for plants, for getting into the soil. That was back in the days when we didn't understand or always look at environmental issues and what our actions were causing. It was just like this great, big, vast wilderness. And so what if we throw a bunch of waste into one of the canyons? It's like we used to pump out sewage well, we still do, into the ocean. It's like, it's so big, we're never going to affect it. So I think it must have, and there's lots of letters and reports to the superintendents about how horrible the water condition was in the park prior to 1950, and around 1950s is when we got the first water line into the park with the first reliable water coming in from the Mancos River. But our water source, so we were collecting it from rainwater, trying to do check dams to collect it in, and dead animals were in it. It was like people were getting sick right and left. It was a horrible situation for water, and having essentially open sewage, it was pretty nasty. So yes, I think that there were environmental damages. I don't think that we've seen any evidence that they're still persisting. Like there's not coliform in the water now. Nature has healed itself and taken care of that. I think composting toilets are great. I think for the Park Service, they probably would be difficult to implement because they require the user to know how to use them and use the, mix it, put the right amount of stuff on the top, keep the lid closed. And as much as we love the public, sometimes they don't always follow directions. So I have not heard of any composting toilets being used in the Park Service, but I think they could be, maybe in really remote areas. That might be something that we would consider.
Great. So Stephanie wants to know, any idea when using the toilet became a personal experience versus a shared one? Just she's thinking back on that picture of the public toilets where there weren't any partitions.
Yeah. So I think concepts of privacy are pretty interesting, and they're really pretty late in arriving. When you think about, especially people who lived in cities, city life was extremely intimate. You heard everything, you saw everything, you smelled everything that your neighbor did. And it was just kind of a given fact that this is acceptable. And it probably wasn't until, in America, mid-1800s, 1900s, that people started to become more self-conscious about smells and appearances and things like that. So some of those toilets, you'll see you'll see a two-holer and it won't have a divider in it. And the thought wasn't really that two people would be using it at the same time. If you look at them, often one hole is smaller and the other one is bigger. So it was like a child's toilet and then an adult's toilet, because little kids, they can slip right down that hole, and that's not good. No one wants that. So no divider might not mean that everyone's just cool with hanging out and going to the pot together. It could be for adults and children going at different times.
So Doug says, I looked up Lewis Mountain out of curiosity, and it appears to be in Greene County, Virginia, just north of Charlottesville.
Thank you, Doug. Excellent research there.
How about anybody else? Do we have anyone who's got more toilet questions? Oh, yep. How about differences in toilet styles between cultures? For example, Western versus Muslim.
Great question. And I'm not an expert on that, but when researching toilet paper, there's a great variety of toilet paper uses and preferences throughout different cultures. Many cultures considered using toilet paper pretty darn disgusting, and think that it's much more hygienic to just use water to clean yourself off with. So yeah, I don't know. I know it's a huge subject, and if you look at toilets as a reflection of culture and societal values, they looking at it through that lens tells you an awful lot about cultures and customs, and what technology is available to the widest group of people. So that's an interesting topic, and I don't have a quick answer for you on that.
Anyone else for toilet talk?
I would just put a plug out there. There's two really great resources for historians and people who just are interested in history. And one is, it's a website called etic2.gov. I think that was it. I can go back in my, oh, now it's not turning again. But what etic2.gov has is not all, but many of the historic plan sets from national parks. So you can search for it by national park, and you can find plan sets from the 1900s and onwards that are really good primary resources for a historian. And then the second plug is for the Library of Congress has now acquired the Sanborn insurance maps. Used to have to pay for them, but now they're free on the Library of Congress. And that's also just a really great resource for historians trying to find out more about towns.
Wonderful. Ed wants to know if there is any evidence regarding the Puebloan sanitation.
Well, that's a very Mesa Verde question. Thank you, Ed. One of the most popular questions that interps are asked are, where did they go to the bathroom? Because everyone wants to know. It's you look around and you don't see any dedicated room for a bathroom. So we don't really know. We don't have concrete evidence one way or another, but archaeologists and folks assume that they probably just went out in the woods in the area, possibly down in the midden areas, away from their homes, because everyone understood you don't go to the bathroom in the same place that you live. And you don't go to the bathroom in the same place where you get your water from. So there might have been areas further away from their living sites that were acceptable to use. I've asked if there's any evidence of like a chamber pot, ancestral Puebloan chamber pot, and then perhaps that's something you could tell with residue testing. And what people have told me is no, they have never found anything like a chamber pot. On occasion, there are coprolites, human petrified waste that has been found, and it's inside a building. And the theory is probably that happened during the winter, that you wouldn't normally be using the bathroom inside. But let's say you were elderly, you were sick, you weren't able to get out, it was wintertime, you would just, have to make the best of it. So there's no conclusive evidence, but we can say probably no chamber pots, and probably somewhere, an acceptable location somewhere away from your house.
All righty. Well, I have a question.
All right.
I know how fascinated you are with restrooms, so I have to ask, what is your favorite restroom that you've been to or experienced or seen?
Every restroom is an experience. My favorite Mesa Verde restroom is actually the Mesa Top Loop restroom, which is a Mission 66 restroom. And I like it because it is really authentic. The tile is still there. It even still has like the same pink pastel glossy paint. Like you can just walk into that bathroom and you walk into 1959. It's really unchanged. And right now, that bathroom has one water line going to it, and it's aging. And what the park has talked about is when that line goes, it would be massively expensive to replace the line, and that they would probably convert it over to a chemical style toilet that would have to be pumped out. So next time you're in Mesa Verde on the Mesa Top Loop, check out the bathroom and enjoy it while you can.
I love it. Now it's on my list of things to do when
Absolutely.
I visit each time.
Places to go. Places to go.
Exactly. The things we must do before our bucket list. Okay, so it looks like everyone wants to say just really nice things. Thank you, Lizzie from Tara. We're flushed with pride over your awesome presentation skills. Casey says fun and informational program. Thank you so much. Ed has one more question. Ed wants to know, are they septic?
Are the chemical toilets septic or septic tanks or?
I'm not sure. Ed, are you still there?
Clarify that a little?
Oh, he says waste disposal.
Are they? I'm not sure what you mean, Ed.
All right. Well, Ed, we want to answer your question, but I'm not sure either of us really understands. But Lizzie is providing her email address right here on the screen. So if you want to give her, just shoot her an email. I'm sure she would be thrilled to answer your question. Oh, Stefan says maybe versus city sewer, he means.
Oh, okay. Well, I can.
And Ed says yes.
It takes a village. It takes a village. So that's a good question, Ed. Our bathrooms up here at Mesa Verde all go to their own sewage system. We are not connected to the city. What you do in Mesa Verde stays in Mesa Verde. It doesn't go anywhere else. It is gravity fed, or there is a septic pump that will push it up to a sewage lagoon. Most of our sewage lagoons are Mission 66 resources, and they date to the 1950s, 1960s. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a delightful vacation lagoon filled with human waste that sits out in the sunshine, and it evaporates, the water evaporates, and then every now and then they will remove the sludge and dispose of it elsewhere. So it's an evaporative, pretty simple system, really, but it's effective, and it's managed to handle 600,000 plus visitors that come to Mesa Verde.
Which is incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Ed's question is answered. Everybody just really wants to say thanks for the presentation, and see, Doug says thank you. And Albert says great subject, nicely handled. I think we can all agree with that. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying thank you to everyone for joining us today. And of course, thank you to you, Lizzie, for your amazing presentation. Before we go, I do want to remind everyone that we'll be taking a break from our webinar series over the summer months. During that break, we hope that you will have the opportunity to enjoy one of our national parks in person. And of course, we look forward to having you join us for webinars again in the fall.